Right, let's expand on this discussion. Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busisiwe Mavuso joins us to talk more about this. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us. While the role of business in boosting and strengthening the economy was acknowledged by the President today as he gave this keynote address, some challenges were also highlighted. What would you say were some of your biggest takebacks as you listened in?
You know, I think it is precisely the issue of partnership, because it's very clear from where we sit, as the business community, as the country, as the leadership of this country, that we will only be able to turn the corner. We will only be able to get ourselves out of this economic rut. We'll only be able to turn our country's trajectory if business and government work together in this country. So you would have heard that the biggest challenge, that the President actually articulated as the one that is facing the country is the issue of youth unemployment. It is a recipe for disaster for South Africa to be sitting with 65% youth unemployment. We saw the unemployment figures come out, I think, about 2 weeks ago. The unemployment has gone up by 0.6%, if I'm not mistaken. We are now sitting at about 33.9. So that makes it 43, round figure 44% unemployment in terms of the expanded definition. You have more people that are unemployed than those that are employed in all the provinces except Gauteng and the Western Cape. And the partnership comes in from that perspective. If we join forces, if we fix the environment, because remember, the only way that we deal with the unemployment is when you get investment to come into the country. But you can't get investment to come into the country when we are failing at the basics. When the network industries that are supposed to be functioning, optimally are not functioning optimally. So we've been talking about 3 out of the 4 network industries that are not functioning optimally. But at the moment, we are very happy because of the partnership to be saying it's now no longer 3 out of the 4, it's 2 out of the 4, because energy security, we have now gotten that right. Transport, logistics and water are the 2 crises that we now have to focus on. Mm-hmm. And I think from a transport and logistics perspective, we need to see Transnet embracing the partnership and the support that business is providing to it, much more eagerly or warmly, like Eskom did, because that is the only way that we're actually going to be able to get the logistics right. I don't know if you heard Mercedes-Benz talking about the fact that they will have to retrench about 400 people because of the logistics constraints. You remember, I think about a few months ago, April, IMF slashed our economic growth forecast because of Transnet. So Transnet is now the new Eskom. It is the burning platform that we all need to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely. More so as we've seen how business deployed substantial resources and capacity as well as expertise to Eskom, underlining the essential role of business and partnership alike. What kind of strategy do you think it's going to take for Transnet as you speak about that, as you speak about the pressing challenges?
The Transnet is obviously working on several private sector partnerships, largely through the private sector participation arrangements in which private investors contribute equity or operating leases. But it was very disappointing today, seeing the headlines that they've actually had to call off the Durban PSP, private sector partnership, that they'd actually put out because the private sector companies that were interested in participating in that partnership were saying the conditions that Transnet has put in there were too onerous. So the history of the logistics sector as well, when you look at it, does have a history of private sector participation. The toll roads, most obviously, the N1 and the N3 toll roads were amongst the first PPPs in our democratic history, and it enabled the rapid deployment of private capital to support economic growth. Those deals made it possible for the private sector to build and operate the roads on 30-year concessions. So the model has even worked for the cross-border infrastructure, particularly the Maputo corridor that links Joburg to Maputo. So if we were pushing the envelope of what is possible, we would have a far greater vision for the rail and port sector. Concessioning these ports and rails, is what we need to do, because concessioning them means that you are outsourcing the running of the rail and the ports to private sector participants. They are not owning it. It's really just outsourcing. It can be a 10-year lease, it can be a 15-year lease, lease, it can be a 30-year lease. What that means is that the private sector will therefore be responsible for the infrastructure maintenance and upgrades. They will be responsible for the terminal operations. They will be responsible for the cargo handling. They will be responsible for the investments in new equipment and technology. They will be responsible for the commercial management. And these are all areas where Transnet is currently failing at the moment. So it therefore makes sense, to say, while we are trying to get our house in order as Transnet, let's not hamstring the country, or let's not, allow the country's economy to actually be stifled, by our inefficiencies. Let's allow those participants and those players that are in a position to can actually, handle the maintenance, the operations, the commercial management. Let's allow, the country to continue exporting. Because otherwise, if we continue in this trajectory, then we're going to be seeing more companies, making the announcements like Mercedes-Benz actually recently did.
Yeah. Very, very important indeed. The president also made mention of partnerships when it comes to ensuring that there is some sort of collaboration when it comes to township businesses, rural businesses. What have been the sore points insofar as challenges are concerned when it comes to ensuring that space does really have economic benefit and muscle to expand and invite stakeholders?
Yeah. That is a very interesting one. Yesterday we had an interesting engagement with Naspers, who has looked at what the role of digital platforms could be in the broader business landscape. It was a very interesting discussion. They actually commissioned this report, which looked at how can we accelerate, the digital platforms? How do we actually better benefit from the platform economy? These are the Ubers and Paul. These are the Checker 6060, these are the Mr. D's, these are the, all of those platform economies. It highlighted something very interesting, that if we were to actually give the necessary SMME support by expanding their market access. So if you were to actually give the necessary SMME support to ensure that these small businesses can actually be put onto these platforms, you can imagine an entrepreneur sitting in Tzaneen can all of a sudden be able to sell to the entire country. They don't have to be restricted to actually sell to their neighbors and to their immediate community. So putting their goods, for instance, and their services on Take a Lot allows them to actually access the national consumer. And that is the power, of the digital economy. And we are looking and trying to find ways of how we put more SMMEs onto those platforms. And I think it's brilliant because these entrepreneurs don't have to rent offices. They don't have to incur overhead costs. They don't have to pay utilities. They don't have to pay sundry costs, but just by being on the platform economy, you can actually see, the growth in their businesses. If their businesses grow, they can hire more people. If they are hiring more people, there's more people in the country that have got disposable income. If more people in the country have got disposable income, there is more demand for goods and services. And if more people are actually employed, it means there is less dependence on the fiscus. So it means we can actually be redirecting the monies that we're paying to social grants to something else. So there is something to be said, about how do we actually ensure that we drive interventions that will actually propel the platform economy. The numbers that were put out yesterday in PO were actually saying that if we were to get this right, it can actually add 100 billion rands into the South African economy by 2035. And there were interest recommendations that were actually put in place in terms of how we can achieve, that 100 billion into our economy. So I think those are some of the things, because I think we know what we've been currently doing. We know the enterprise and supply development that we're currently giving to SMMEs. We know that there are these DFIs that are giving them funding, but somehow that model doesn't seem to be working. So we therefore need to find other ways of how do we actually accelerate and facilitate greater SMME participation by expanding their market access. Because when you talk to SMMEs, they will tell you, that their biggest problem is not access to finance, but it's access to markets. So you can therefore imagine, rural revitalization and township economy revitalization can be facilitated through the platform economy. We just probably maybe need to say the DFIs that are giving these companies money, should they be maybe taking a portion of that money and be focusing it on the platform economy to enable, the expansion of this market access? So those are some of the conversations, and ideas that we're exploring in terms of growing the rural and township economy.
Insightful indeed. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure chatting to you. Business Leadership South Africa CEO Busisiwe Mavuso, giving those strategies and, of course, the trade of thought when it comes to entrepreneurship and job creation in the country.